I came to Singapore from Malaysia a while ago, but lately, I keep hearing on the news how Kuala Lumpur is actually way more expensive than Singapore when it comes to the cost of living, as life has become so crazy expensive that more and more people are wondering is life better in Singapore or Malaysia? And that is the question we'll be exploring today, because in this video, I'm going to show you the data and my personal experience of living and working in both countries, as well as breaking down the most common expenses like the cost of housing, food, entertainment, and traveling around. And at the very end, I'll give you my honest answer: is life better in Malaysia or Singapore? And it won't be easy because the first one we'll compare is the real cost of living.
So two different places to stay in two completely different countries, both offering you the best of the best in terms of quality. But which one is better and cheaper?
And this isn't just an easy comparison. Despite most reports saying it now costs more to live in KLCC as opposed to Singapore, it's not as simple as you think. So to truly compare the cost of housing, I picked the most luxurious apartment at the best part of Singapore. And for Malaysia, I also picked the fanciest one they had in their capital city, right next to the city center. Both of them came with everything you need when it comes to living a life of luxury, with the only downside being the one in Singapore didn't come with all-you-can-eat breakfast buffet, and their gym was a bit smaller, but the massive kitchen both inside and outside the room made up for it. And you might think that deciding which country is more expensive is as easy as comparing the cost of staying here, but we have to keep in mind that at the time of this video, the average salary in Singapore was about $4,500 a month, which is almost the same as what people are making in New York City, while the average salary in Malaysia, despite reaching an all-time high in recent years, was still about $1,500 a month for a skilled worker. That's a 3 times pay gap for two countries literally next to one another. But it only gets crazier with the cost of housing, because my apartment in Singapore costs a little over $4,200 a month with taxes, but my luxury twin bedroom in Malaysia only cost me a little over $1,800. But I could easily be lowered down to $450 a month, excluding utilities, if you're not picky about the location, to live further away from downtown. So despite jobs in Singapore paying almost 3 times better based on the rent-to-income ratio, Malaysia gets to save a larger portion after paying for the rent. So that's a tiny victory. But you gotta admit, Singapore is so great at designing kitchens that fit into a tiny room.
But you probably don't even need a kitchen due to how great and surprisingly affordable all the street foods can be.
Because the next one we'll be comparing is the cost of buying food, your everyday grocery shopping, and eating at the restaurant. And what makes it super easy is a crazy amount of international brands all over Singapore and Malaysia, which is what we're going to start with, because the typical Big Mac in Malaysia literally costs less than $3. But in Singapore, the same thing will cost you over $5. KFC is difficult to compare, since almost every country sells completely different stuff in their local KFC. For example, in Australia, I had this Stinger Tower Burger that I've never seen anywhere else. But by comparing the basic chicken burger, the one in Singapore cost about $5.10, while the one in Malaysia was only $3.40 last time I checked. Dunkin' Donuts was another thing loved by both Singapore and Malaysia, and I even managed to buy the same one, but instead of only costing $1 in Malaysia, the one in Singapore costs almost 2 times more at $1.80. But I have to give credit where it's due. Donuts in Singapore somehow taste sweeter and is closer to the original American flavor. But we're only considering the price, so in the battle of fast food, Malaysia easily gets a point. But the grocery price is when it gets almost impossible to move on, because I wasn't expecting Singapore to be this cheap when it comes to grocery shopping. And it didn't help that Malaysia is getting more expensive each year with their crazy inflation. And you can see it for yourself, because I bought this sparkling water for 70 cents, this iced lemon tea for 44 cents, this one-of-a-kind New York flavor of Oreo for $1.50, with the most unbelievable being this bottle of soy milk for less than 50 cents. Now, if I didn't tell you where I bought these from, you might assume it's Malaysia, because they're known for being the cheapest. But these were all bought in Singapore. Way cheaper, if not as cheap as ones in Malaysia. To a point, I question how the supermarkets in Singapore are even making any profit.
I didn't know this flavor existed before, and apparently it's only available in here or in Australia. So if you want it, you're gonna have to come here.
But it only gets crazier, because this cup of strawberry milkshake from the local Misha cost me $1.80 in Singapore, but in Malaysia, it was pretty much only $1. A big vegetarian pizza in Singapore cost me about $11, while the pizzas I ate in Malaysia were mostly less than $6. But cup noodle was the one that settled it once and for all, as I got these two in Singapore for $2, and this one for only 80 cents, but the similar one I found in Malaysia was literally only 70 cents. Okay, that's a draw.
So can we just agree to disagree that eating cup noodles is a really good money-saving hack in both countries? I know you don't want to eat too many of these though.
So that's why up next, we'll be eating anything from the best local street food to the fanciest restaurants you can find, because both Singapore and Malaysia are known for inventing some of the most delicious food in all of Asia, to the point point where many tourists I know only come here for the food. And the best way to keep your food costs down in Singapore is by going to hawker centers where you can easily find a meal below $5 like this $4.50 nasi lemak incredibly spicy, this $4.40 fish rice with a drink, and this $3.50 fish porridge to the absolute cheapest at $3 tomato noodles.
You said the whole noodle soup was only $3? That was insane. There ain't no way Malaysia could beat that, huh?
Well, don't get your hopes up yet, because I've lived in Malaysia long enough to know that the best and cheapest street food can only be found here. Start with this $4.50 curry laksa, this $3.30 fish head bihun I found in the beautiful city called Malacca, and it gets even crazier in a place called Klang, just next to Kuala Lumpur, with this wonton noodles only $1.80, this massive vegetable stir fry also $1.80, and this cup of coffee, this coconut dessert, and this kaya toast literally only 50 cents each, making eating street food in Malaysia way cheaper than in Singapore, and that's a win. But going to fancy restaurants is kind of the same, since Malaysia has always had the problem of restaurants with air conditioning being way pricier than the rest. So I guess wherever you live, just stick to street food and you can save money. But next, I want to compare the weather, since Singapore and Malaysia are both super hot with the seasonal monsoon, making it a bit tolerable. But Singapore feels hotter because people tend to be out there a lot, while in Malaysia, you can't just get on your car or taxi, then drive directly to your destination, skipping everything in between. And the monsoon season in Malaysia also seems more severe, since I've always heard about Malaysia having floods, but rarely hear Singapore having the same problem. Maybe Singapore is just that good at getting the water out of the city, which is especially impressive when you consider just how populated the whole place is.
On the other hand, it's very hard to find a place to yell at the camera in Singapore. This everywhere you go, it's all crowded from top to bottom.
Now let's talk about the one thing that on the surface, Singapore is doing way better than Malaysia, and that is public transportation. But Malaysia has been rapidly expanding its metro outside of Kuala Lumpur, to a point where if you haven't been here for a decade, you wouldn't believe how advanced the whole city is, as well as all the buses you can take. But the problem is still here. Oftentimes, buses or ferries will get delayed or even outright cancelled, whereas that doesn't happen in Singapore. As for the cost, probably for a whole day, and going to all the iconic places in Kuala Lumpur cost me about $2, while doing the same in Singapore, like visiting Chinatown and some other famous stuff you see on the postcard, cost me about $4. What both Malaysia and Singapore have in common is no eating or drinking inside the metro, and most importantly, no durian. Domestic travel is another thing I want to compare, because Malaysia is known for having the most beautiful islands in all of Asia, while Singapore is mostly man-made. For both countries, it's easy to walk over a place and the weather is nice, even though Malaysia doesn't always have sidewalks, especially in some rural places. As for the cost, in Malaysia, it's easy to find museums to visit for free, but in Singapore, it's only free for the locals. A ticket to Universal Studios in Singapore cost $62 when I was there, while the famous indoor amusement park in Kuala Lumpur cost about $22 for foreigners. So in this category, Malaysia totally wins thanks to all the history you can see and the beautiful islands like Tioman, Langkawi and Malacca, etc. If you love swimming and snorkeling, but Singapore gets a point for having the best public transport.
Oh, in case you don't know, the power socket in both countries is exactly the same.
Next, we're going to compare safety, because many people who never come to Malaysia always think of the place as dangerous and chaotic, mostly due to how Malaysia is portrayed in Western media. But for me personally, even in some of the shadiest parts of Malaysia, like Klang, with many people calling it the most dangerous city of Southeast Asia, I never felt in danger, especially if you speak Malay, making traveling around the country pretty much a breeze. On the other hand, Singapore is safe thanks to everything being under heavy surveillance, but many complain Singapore has too many rules and laws to a point even the locals don't know if something is permitted or not, whereas Malaysia is flexible when it comes to a lot of them. So for a more laid-back kind of lifestyle, I love Malaysia more, but on the scale of safety, it's totally a draw.
And Malaysia's come a long way to having clean bathrooms since like 20 years ago. I'm genuinely impressed.
But what genuinely surprised me was how nice everyone is in Malaysia, especially in East Malaysia, where every time I go out there, I make a bunch of new friends. But Singapore is a bit complicated, since many people, especially on social media, love to make negative comments about people in Singapore being rude and less welcoming. But I feel like it's only a cultural difference. When I was in the supermarket doing some shopping, an older uncle yelled at me from behind to move away, and I was shocked, but he seemed to be in a hurry. We also need to give Singapore props for their escalator etiquette, like leaving the right lane for people in a hurry and holding doors for one another. But overall, I find it a lot easier to make friends in Malaysia just by saying hello to everyone. Work culture is another thing we have to compare, since nobody I know comes to Singapore long term without the intention of working here. As you can see, they're literally paying you $2,500 a month to work at KFC, even more than what people make in America. And that's a win for Singapore. But one of my friends from Malaysia come here to work for 8 years, and he says it's a lot more fast-paced and demanding, and And not just his experience, studies have found that Singapore has some of the highest burnout rates in the world. Contrary to that, all my friends still in Malaysia, from entry-level, senior employees, to even small business owners, always have time to hang out and eat delicious food. But my Singaporean friend working a tech job doesn't even have a 30 minutes to have a drink after his shift, which lasted almost a whole day. I doubt he even had time to use the bathroom. But overall, someone I know who works both in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur puts it the best. Unless you're working minimum wage, the quality of life is way better in Kuala Lumpur because the salary you're earning there, even if a lot less, can still buy you a better quality of life due to housing, cars, and eating out is less expensive than Singapore, and that's a win for Malaysia. And that brings us to cultural diversity, since both Malaysia and Singapore are known for being a cultural melting pot with many different people, ethnicities, and languages. Singapore has 4 official languages, while Malaysia makes Malay their official language, but puts English, Tamil, and Chinese as their main languages. But despite being so different, most countries share the same love for cats, and I was able to find stray cats to pet everywhere.
So now we're back at Singapore, ready to put an end to this age-long debate of which country is better. Is it Malaysia or Singapore? Now it's been decades since my first visit, so I can tell that on one hand, Malaysia keeps on getting more expensive with the house and rent and buying everyday groceries, especially if you live in the KLCC. On the other hand, Singapore appears to be getting cheaper and cheaper. It didn't used to be possible to find a hotel or apartment for under $100 or having a meal for $3 or less. Now you have way cheaper options like hostels and capsule hotels. I actually spend a little bit less traveling and staying here as opposed to my weeks in Kuala Lumpur. And data seems to agree with that, as if you look at the predicted inflation, Singapore will be about 1.5 to 2.5%, which is a significant decrease as compared to the past 2 years, while Malaysia is anywhere from 2 to 3.5%, way higher than that of Singapore. So if those predictions turn out to be true, how many years until Malaysians are forced to move to Singapore, not only for the better paying job, but also for the lower cost of living? Tell me in the comments what you think is going to happen. And let's look at the final score.
In the end, Malaysia wins for being a more relaxing place to live, but Singapore is perfect if you're willing to work harder than everyone else. But there are too many things legal around the world, but legal only in Singapore. But what exactly are they? Well, you can click on this video to find that out.